Hello, friends. So, are you ready for a story? It's good because I've got quite a few. So, every once in a while, I like to tell a completely true story with absolutely no embellishments whatsoever. And I will caution you and tell you that this is absolutely a true story, and the way that you can tell, I don't win in this one. I actually kind of look like a fool. You see, it goes some years ago. I was traveling to get to Avalon. There was a beautiful full moon out, and it was quite nice weather, and so I had a good camp by the fire, and my travel companion was with me. My travel companion had, of course, drifted asleep quite quickly. It was a bit of a snore, and there he was in his sack, just... When I start to hear thump, 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 the brush kind of gave away any sort of noise, so I wasn't super worried about someone sneaking up on us. And so I looked out to where I could hear these what sounded like footsteps. They were certainly big enough to me. I couldn't see anything. Now remember, I've got a full moon, I've got the campfire still, it's not quite burned so low as to not be able to see just out. I could see nothing. Thump, thump. That's still quite odd. So I looked about to where a head might be of a taller man. You see, they sounded like bigger footsteps, so I thought it might be a man. I saw nothing. So I kept looking down. Perhaps it's just a shorter man, or a taller woman, or just someone with unusually large feet for their size. I kept looking down and down and down. I still saw nothing. I was quite confused by this. Then I had the smart idea. I'm going to look for where I think the footsteps are coming and go up from there. Perhaps I'm misjudging the exact distance here. Still thump, thump, thump. Well, I look down to where I think I hear the footsteps. And I see a disturbance in the underbrush. Thump, thump, thump. You see, it wasn't footsteps I was hearing. It was the body falls of two weasels playing with each other in the leaves. Thump, thump. Their bodies long enough that they sounded like, honestly, quite large feet. I don't think I've ever felt so foolish in my life. And of course, naturally, my travel companion slept through it. There's a reason he's not my travel companion any longer. A long time ago, in a land not that far away, there was a beautiful little village by the name of Petit Lyon. Now, Petit Lyon had once been a very small town. It was next to a much larger town. Unfortunately, the larger town of Lyon had fallen into ruin over the years, and Petit Lyon was surely on the same path. So all of the elders of the village got together and thought, what can we do to save our town? Well, the youngest among them came up with one of these ideas. You see, indeed, the town herald was only there not as an elder, but as an observer. But sure enough, the young Tybalt spoke up, said, what if we have a tournament? Now, tournaments, of course, are quite popular. Jousting is a good time. And the elders thought on this for a moment and decided that surely this was the answer. Now, in order to have a proper tournament, though, you have to have lots of knights. And so they sent messages out to all of the corners of the kingdom, and even beyond, across even several of the seas. At first, nobody answered, until the town mayor had a good thought. Now, see, Lord Mayor thought to actually put up a prize from his own stocks. You see, he had this most beautiful ruby, the largest of its kind that anyone had ever seen. And he decided that that would be the prize. A fair enough of a prize and enough of a fee for him to be able to save his dear town. With no town, there's no taxes to collect, and with no taxes to collect, well, which point is it to be the Lord Mayor? But I digress. He put up this great ruby, and sure enough, entrance began filing in. Well, see, the richest man in town had the same idea, indeed. He brought out this most beautiful opal that shone like the moon, and he put that forward. And soon all of the participants doubled. Finally, the day for the tournament came. Now, because there were so many, this took many days. And not only did it bring in participants, it brought in those who wanted to watch, and horseshoers, and farriers, and leather workers, and woodworkers, and all these wonderful sundry people who were bringing their money and spending it in the shops, and buying fine wares, and everything was wonderful. The first 2 days of the tournament went splendidly until they finally whittled it down until there were 2 finalists for champion. Dame Margaret from the next country over. She was a fierce competitor. And, of course, Sir Alphonse, the local knight, but not so local. The 2 were tied after 2 tilts and were getting ready for the 3rd, when suddenly the entire sky above them darkened out of nowhere. There wasn't an eclipse, there were no clouds, it wasn't nightfall. The entire town began to panic. What was going on? And then our herald, who was still young enough that he believed in magic, looked up. He saw what was happening. You see, he had not lost his sight for magic yet, and he saw a great red dragon, large enough to blot out more than half the sky. And also in the sky was a great flying unicorn. And the 2 were doing battle. And he had no idea what was going on. No, so he stopped, and gathering up his bravery in his loudest voice, he called up, "What are you doing?" Bit of an odd thing to try, really, but oddly enough, it actually worked. You see, the dragon paused and looked down. "Well, human, we have come to participate in the tournament." Well, this was a bit unusual. Tybalt was very good at trying to figure out new things in the unusual. So he looked around and he had noticed both Dame Margaret and Sir Alphonse had fallen off their horse in the final tilt. But no one had known who had hit the ground first. And he thought quick. And he called up, he said, "Well, you've bested our champions. Surely you are the winners." At this, the dragon landed and looked at the man. "Do you have the authority to call this?" The herald had, of course, been running much of the tournament, but he turned to the Lord Mayor, and he turned to the richest man, who had both, of course, set down these prizes. He said, "We must give prizes to our champion." The 2 men agreed, a bit scared, because quite suddenly there were these great depressions in the ground and hoof marks. You see, they were quite old and had forgotten what magic was like. So Tybalt turned to them. He said, "Well, you shall have your ruby, and the unicorn indeed shall have their opal." The unicorn at this stamped its feet furiously, and the dragon said back, "No, nay, I want the opal. My friend here came for the ruby." Oh, Tybalt, of course, shook his head at this. Semantics, of course. And so he declared it to be so, and the 2 were gifted their prizes in a very special way, under a circumstance. You see, Tybalt was a quick thinker, and he asked that the dragon and the unicorn be involved in the victor's parade. It's quite typical that the victor will lead a great parade through town. It's only the best way to celebrate their victory. The dragon, of course, acquiesced to this, and the unicorn seemed to as well, with a neigh and a stomp. And so the next day they lowered banners across the streets and widened as best they could so that the two could fit through. And Sir Alphonse's horseshoer himself created great hoof covers for the unicorn out of the rubies. And they had the great opal mounted by the local blacksmith, a great chain for the dragon. The next day, sure enough, down the centre of the street, the dragon and the unicorn walked, one after the other. Wasn't quite wide enough yet. And as people watched, as the great opal bobbed and the rubies pranced, well, their minds kind of filled everything in. And the dragon became just as real as it indeed was. And the unicorn, of course, became quite visible. Because you see, sometimes magic only takes a bit of belief. How? Ever since that day, the town of Petit Leon has thrived. You see, every year they hold the tournament of the dragon and the unicorn. And it is said that anyone who is descendant from anyone who was in the town at that time, well, they can see magic without fail well into their years. Because you see, magic saved the town. So why not believe in it? Sort of affinity for a very particular type of story. A lot of people don't quite understand why I enjoy it. See, I quite enjoy the tragedy. You know, sad tales aren't quite for everyone. A lot of people want the happily ever after. Well, sometimes you just don't get it, and there's a good reason why. One of these tales is perhaps my favourite from ancient Greece. It's the story of the hero Orpheus. Now, Orpheus is that special class of man, the hero that's not quite a man, not a typical mortal man. He's not a god either. He's somewhere in between. He's able to do special things. And in fact, he was quite blessed. He was a musician. He was blessed by Apollo. He was able to pick up any instrument and start playing it. Well, there's something to be said about musicians, and especially ones that travel in distant lands with. He was a member on the Argo, Jason's ships, Argonauts. And sure enough, he was breaking hearts everywhere. Musicians. That's how it goes. Until one day, he found the most amazing human that he'd ever set eyes on, that he'd ever met. Eurydice was, well, she was his soulmate, he was sure of it. She was so kind and so lovely, both in fairness and just as a human. She was kind and wonderful and cared about others. And he fell in love with her in a moment, in an instant. And she fell in love with him. Sure enough, the two of them decided that they would be wed. This was not without sadness amongst many of his previous paramours, but this was something special and he knew it. It was worth angering the other women. Well, the two of them had a lovely ceremony and were wed, and as is custom, they consulted a soothsayer. Now, for those of you that don't know, a soothsayer will sit and read special signs from the gods, perhaps in leaves if you have tea, such a luxury, or perhaps cast bones, or even runes in some cases. This soothsayer looked into the smoke in front of him, and he paused for a moment. He looked up at Orpheus, and he looked up at Eurydice, and he smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, it didn't reach his eyes. He smiled. You will have the truest, most wonderful love that has ever been known to man. And then he stopped. Now, there's something about the way that he stopped. But Orpheus looked at him. Is there not more? The soothsayer looked down, unsure of how to continue. He looked back up at Orpheus. Aye, there is, but I'd rather you just heard the first part. This wouldn't quite do. This was not in keeping with tradition. He should hear the whole thing so that he could perhaps avoid great tragedy. He implored the soothsayer, please continue. I will hold you no ill will, good soothsayer. You only come here with the truth that has been provided to you. This is not your doing. Please do continue. The soothsayer, being assured at least of the mercy of his hosts, decided to continue. He picked up where he left off. He said, you shall have the most true love ever known to man, but it shall not last. You shall not have much time together indeed at all. Now with that, he looked downcast into the smoke and fidgeted, quite sad that he had to proclaim such a horrible fate on such a beautiful, joyous day. Well, Orpheus decided it was no matter. He had her now, and even if it was only for a short while, he would love her for as long as he could with all of his heart. Unfortunately, the soothsayer was more than a little accurate. The very next morning, as Eurydice rose from her bed, she stepped on a snake. Now, it wasn't the snake's fault. It didn't know it had gotten into a house. It was just a snake. And then suddenly something is stepping on it, so it did what a snake does, and it turned and it bit her. It was a poisonous snake. Before they could rush her off to the temple of Asclepius or some great doctor, Eurydice, she died. She died from her injury, and her soul was lost. Now, if Orpheus were not a god, this would be the end of this story. Nay, Orpheus, he was a hero. So he thought about what he would do. He decided that he would descend into the underworld itself and go after his love, because one night is not enough. He didn't care what the soothsayer had warned him. One night surely could not have been the god's will. He would have his love. And so he did what no other hero before him had done. Indeed, Heracles came up with this because Orpheus had already done it. Orpheus descended into the underworld, a mortal man into the underworld. Now, he was able to pay off the ferryman. As he crossed the river Styx, he did not forget. And he came face to face with Cerberus, the great three-headed dog. Now, some of you might realize that a certain unfortunate woman by the name of Jo did indeed get something quite correct. You see, Cerberus loved one thing, and it was one thing that Orpheus was especially good at. Orpheus began to play music for the great dog, and the great dog calmed and relaxed and laid its big head upon its paws and fell asleep. Sure enough, Orpheus was able to pass, and he made his way all the way to the great throne room of the underworld, where the great Lord Idoneus sat, Hades. And since this was winter time, on her throne the great Queen Persephone sat. Hades and Persephone ruled over the underworld, and contrary to so many stories will tell you, this was not a case of her being tricked into it or anything along those lines. The basic takeaway is that, well, Demeter is a helicopter parent, like those little flurry whizzy things that Da Vinci talks about. And, well, Persephone's smarter than people give her credit for. So indeed, Hades did truly love his wife, but was quite shocked to see wandering into the throne room a mortal. He cast him out. He said, "Begone, Orpheus, this is not a place for you. Not yet you are still alive, and we cannot have those among the living in the underworld." And Orpheus called up and beseeched the king of the underworld and cried out to him. He said, "Good Lord, King of all that is past and all that is beneath the ground, I beseech you in the name of true love, as you have with your good lady wife. I have come for the soul of my wife, so that I can return her to the body, so that I can have my love." Hades would have sent him away, brave or not, stupid or not, enough to have come all this way. But his Queen Persephone laid a hand on his arm, and she whispered in his ear, said, "My dearest, do you not love me? Clearly this man loves his dear lady wife as much as you love me. Could we not make an exception just this once, in the name of true love?" Hades being, of course, the greatest husband of all Greek mythology, and I will fight anyone who says otherwise, turns to his lovely lady wife and decides to agree to this with one rule. You see, when a mortal's eyes look upon a shade, that shade is doomed forever to be a shade. Something about the way and the laws of the universe, something about how once something is known, it cannot be unknown. And so he called forth the shade of our dear Eurydice. But before he did, he gave Orpheus a warning. He said to him, "You cannot look upon your lady wife until she has been returned and restored to her body. Doing so, you condemn her to stay with me." Orpheus, of course, this was simple enough of a task. He would not look, he would simply guide his dear love, and they would go back and he would restore her to her body, and all would be well, and they would live happily ever after. And then he took his wife's hand. He felt a bit of cold. He knew she was back there, and he started on his way. Now, the whole journey out of the underworld, he had to be careful to watch his step, for he was trying to guide his dear love. The whole time she asked him, "My Orpheus, will you not turn and look at me? I wish to gaze upon your face so. My husband, please." If there's something about deals you make with gods, is you don't tend to tell about all the details, for doing so can inadvertently nullify the contract. So Orpheus knew that he must just lead her. "My love, you must just follow." And soon enough they had come back across the river Styx and were climbing the great staircase back to their world. They were at the very top when suddenly, Orpheus couldn't help himself. Out of instinct, he turned around. He looked for his dear lady wife. Shades cannot fall. The damage was done, even though he had the best of intentions to turn and look upon her. The damage was done, and her shade faded back, all the way back into the underworld. He had failed, and he had to return to the surface knowing that he had failed. And as he climbed out of that hole, he knew that though indeed they had the truest love, it would not last in this lifetime. Perhaps the next. And he needn't wait very long. You see, for all the paramours he had jilted, it's a bit of a furious lot after him. And our poor Orpheus, driven mad by grief already, was driven off a cliff and into the great ocean below. But you see, as sad as that story is, the two had something that was not known before and has not been known since. The truest love of all humankind. And even though it was only for but a wee moment, they had the great blessing to experience that. No one could ever take that from them. And now, indeed, as any heroes do, he spends his afterlife, yes, a shade, but a shade in the Elysium fields with his love. Is that not what we all want? To rest easy and well and free? Oh, another fun tale I like to tell that's been passed down comes to me from Aesop. You see, Aesop was a great fabulist far back in the day. And he told this lovely little tale. It's a reminder that you're not always as smart as you think you are. You see, once upon a time, there was a fox. The fox was quite a cunning little animal, and it meandered on through the woods. Now, as it did so, a crow alighted on the top branch of a nearby tree. This crow was a great, beautiful bird. Sure enough, in its beak had a bit of cheese. What a lucky little crow, you see. The fox thought so for just a moment and decided he would woo his neighbour the crow into dropping that breakfast for him. Sure enough, he called up to the crow, who was quite aware of how wily the fox could be, and called in and said, "Hello, dear neighbour friend. How has your day been?" Now the crow, sensing a trick, kept his beak firmly shut about the morsel. Well, the fox would not be deterred, though. He called up again, "Oh, how beautiful you look today indeed, crow. Such shiny, glossy black feathers, and such a magnificent beak. You look as if perhaps you could be the greatest of all the birds in the forest today." Now this, the crow, was a bit susceptible to flattery, forgets themselves a bit, forgets about the breakfast in their beak, and calls down a thank you to the fox, quite flattered. Unfortunately, as you open your mouth, you kind of lose things in your mouth. And so the cheese went tumbling down the tree, down to the forest ground, where the fox, of course, gobbled it up, called up to the crow and said, "Aye, but we are beautiful, but watch for the vanity, for you see, as long as you don't keep your wits about you, you're not the smartest animal in this forest." Aye, from that day forward, the crow always watched out and thought before it gave into action.